So we'll talk a little bit about the concept of a harmless breach. I'm going to do a little bit of storytelling. We're going to get into some context around data security, and I'm going to try to make sure that this is relevant for everybody. So, like I said, my name is Zach Sullivan. I grew up in a city called Worcester, Massachusetts, if any of you know Worcester. Great, thank you. So, with that said, you know, I also spent a good amount of time in Boston, and was pretty close to a place called Charlestown, Massachusetts. Some of you, maybe one or two of you, has seen a movie called The Town. Great Boston movie. And really was about the fact that Charlestown, Massachusetts was really a prolific place for bank robbers. The most successful and notorious bank robbers across the world actually, for some reason, came from the same neighborhood in this place called Charlestown, Massachusetts. And what they did was they found out, really spent the time that it takes to learn how to rob a bank. And I'm going to use some analogies here between cybersecurity criminals and bank robbers just to kick things off. So if I'm a bank robber, what am I going to do, right? How am I going to successfully rob a bank? Well, first off, I'm going to take the time that it takes to do research, right? I might get a hotel or get an apartment across the street. I want to know who's coming. I want to know when they're leaving. I want to know who has access to the money. I want to know who has access to the vault. I might spend a year, maybe even 2 years, timing everything out. What time do the police make their run around the neighborhood? How much time do I have to get in and out? It might be 2 minutes. And I'm going to get to the point where I'm going to map this and say, I've got 2 minutes to get in and get out. So at that day, whatever day it is, that me and my crew decide we're going to go into this bank, we're going to know exactly who to go after. We're going to know exactly who has access to the bank. We're going to know exactly who could be the one to call the police or hit the button. And so with precision, we're going to get in and get the right person and get to that vault. Now imagine that the bank is your corporate perimeter and that the vault is your data itself. And imagine that that day comes and I say, you have access to the vault, bring me to the vault, open up that vault. I've got the bags in my hand, I'm getting ready to go in and take all the money. And I get inside that vault, and every single dollar inside that vault is also protected with its own bank vault. Now what do I do? So to start things off, the reason I bring that up is cybersecurity criminals are trying to get to the data. They're trying to get past that corporate perimeter and into the data itself. They're trying to ransomware and exfiltrate that data. That is their job, and they take it very seriously. So as the cybersecurity community, it's our job to look at how we can protect that data. And one way to change the incentive for the adversary is to make sure that the data is protected itself. So with that said, I see a trend taking place, and if I was to say 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now, what I think really needs to take place is that data security gets closer to the data itself and has less reliance on perimeter-based controls. When I think perimeter-based controls, right, think DLP tools, think classification tools, discovery tools, encryption in itself. What I'll say is this. Seclore's core competency is called EDRM, Enterprise Digital Rights Management. Enterprise Digital Rights Management's been out for a long time. I'm going to age myself here a bit. But Enterprise Digital Rights Management came out when Napster started back in the day. And I was one of those people who was stealing music. That's what we did. We downloaded free music, and it was wonderful to not have to pay for a CD and be able to download music for free. So that's when the concept of EDRM came out, right? And when EDRM came out, everybody saw this capability and said, oh my God, this can be so relevant because you're bringing data security closer to the data itself. But unfortunately, there was too much emphasis on the end user to make the determination on what they were going to protect and how they protected it. And we all know how that works. Regardless of whether or not everybody has the best intentions, if we put it in the hands of the end user, mistakes are going to happen. what do I mean by harmless breach? First of all, let's just consider those of you who are new are going to get breached at some point, and those of you who've been in the game for a while have already been breached. It's not an if, it's a when. Now, if I have resided to that fact, now I might want to think a little bit differently. If somebody gets into the system, how do I prevent that breach from leaking my data? How do I prevent the impact of that breach more so than anything else? Because the breach is going to take place, meaning somebody's going to get into that perimeter. But once they do, how do I limit the impact? One way to do that is what I just mentioned to you. Bring the data security closer to the data itself, so if somebody gets into the system, that data itself has a level of protection on it. Now let's take it a little bit further. There are a lot of regulatory compliance requirements out there today that are putting a very heavy emphasis on how data is shared. And I'll give an example. If I was a CISO 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and I had an NDA with another company and I shared sensitive data with them, and that company got breached, I was protected. But because of New York Data Privacy Act, CCPA, NIST, GDPR, and so many other regulatory compliance requirements are saying, no, that's not the case anymore. You share your employee PII data, customer PII data, and that data gets breached at a third party, you're still responsible for reporting that as a breach, because it's a breach of your data. So one of the great things about EDRM, Enterprise Digital Rights Management, is that once this data is protected, it's protected anywhere it travels, regardless of the device, regardless of the application, regardless of the network. So I can have security policies that stay with the data throughout its entire life cycle. And it's important to note that there is a life cycle of the data. The day of believing that I can keep my data within my corporate boundary is gone. It doesn't exist anymore. On average, companies are working with up to 800 third parties. It's an insane amount of third parties. What would some of those examples be? I work with a payroll company. I work with a fabricator, a supplier, a law firm. I'll go through some of these use cases as we go. So $215 billion was spent in cybersecurity in 2024. That was up from about $195 billion in 2023, and that was up from $174 billion in 2022. So what's happening? Well, spend is going up. I don't think it's a spend problem, right? The number of breaches keep increasing, and we keep spending more money. It's not a spend problem. If we sit here and we look at this and we take the same approaches that we're taking to protecting data again, we're not solving the problem. What we need to do is we need to bring data security closer to the data itself. We need to change our approach. We need to change our mindset. So today, how's this data traveling? Well, if I look at that building right now, and that's the corporate perimeter, I'm going to have file folders that contain sensitive information. Certainly, I have emails that have sensitive information. I have employees that are downloading information. Information's being shared with third parties. It's being shared with SaaS tools. It's constantly going in and out of that corporate perimeter. And it's going beyond the enterprise network at a rapid rate that's never been seen before. So with that said, how can I control that data? And more so, how can I control that data? How can I make sure that I understand my data? Because I think when we think data, we start to think, okay, well, maybe there's Excel files. Maybe there's Word files, PDF files. We have to be thinking in a file agnostic way. It doesn't matter what the file format is. There's going to be sensitive data that we need to protect. It doesn't matter where that's going to go or how it's going to get consumed. Is it going to be consumed on an Android phone, on an iPhone, on an iPad? Is it in Box, Dropbox? Is it in SharePoint? Is it going to a third party? Is it within my system? So you start thinking full picture here, that there's so many different types of file formats and so many different places that that data goes, that again, being able to bring that data security closer to the data itself becomes really important. So I'll talk a little bit about what EDRM is. EDRM is a way to encrypt data, and that encryption stays with that file. It also gives organizations the ability to be able to control how that's used? Can somebody print it, edit it, screen share it? What can they actually do with the data? And this can now be done automatically. So think about automating the process of data protection. How can that be done? One of the ways that that can be done is by understanding the data. Some of you may have gone through a CASB journey or a DLP journey or a discovery journey, which essentially gives you the ability to discover that data. So you might wonder, what's the difference between EDRM and, let's say, a DLP tool, discovery tool? The difference is all those tools that I just mentioned are constrained to within the corporate boundary. So now I've found data, I know it's sensitive, but this platform can make a yes/no decision on whether or not that data is going to leave, yes or no. And increasingly now the answer to that is yes. It has to leave, it has to move. It's not a decision that I can make on that data, it's just the way business is run. If I'm a bank, I have sensitive PII data and I have loan officers and they're collecting and they're sharing that data. If I'm a manufacturing company, like a large automotive manufacturing company, for example, I'm probably going to share sensitive data with my fabricators and suppliers. I don't have a choice. Ford's one of my biggest customers. Ford leverages Seclore, and actually a lot of other auto manufacturers leverage Seclore in a few different ways. Now, I'll give an example. Auto manufacturers have a cycle planning team. This is typically a 10-year plan on all the vehicles that are coming out. So the new vehicles that are coming out in 2025, actually that concept was created somewhere around 2015. When that happens, there's actually a mold, there's concepts, there's drawings, CAD files, then there's actually a clay mold that comes out the size of a car, and they make it out of clay. That's how they do that. And they formulate it and make it look just like the car that's going to come out of clay. Then they take more CAD drawings and pictures, etc., and then they start to build and plan that. When I was a kid, I loved Jeeps. I imagined myself owning an incredible Jeep, and when I'd be at the store with my mom and I'm like going to, at a grocery store, I would look at the Car and Driver type of magazine or the Jeep magazines, and I'd be like, Mom, can I get one of these? And she'd let me buy the magazine. And I'd look and I wanted to know and I wanted to see this next one that was coming out, but it was covered with a tarp. So I'm like, well, that's cool, it's coming out, but why can't I see it? But now I understand, because there's incredible value in the launch of that vehicle, in getting so many people together to look at it, to take photos, to go on social media, right? And so they don't want that to get leaked. So those internal employees on the cycle planning team, they can really do two things. They can work on those files at the corporate office. They can't print it, they can't edit it, they can't screen share it, they can't do anything else with that data. They can't download it on a USB drive, that's it. You're on the corporate network, you're working on these essentially Excel files that go on forever, but you can't do anything else. There's watermarks, and I'm telling you, if somebody made a mistake, accidentally screenshotted, accidentally shared their screen on a call, anything like that, I mean, you're out the door in a second. So we're locking down that information. We're actually helping prevent those users from making a mistake that they 99.999% don't ever want to make. It could just be an accident. And you have an accident like that, and you are gone that day. Well, there's other examples too, because an auto manufacturer might build a vehicle, but a lot of the times what they're doing is they're building the concept of that vehicle. They're building some of the largest components. But more than 80% of that vehicle is actually outsourced through fabricators and suppliers. So I'll give an example why it's really important to protect that data. It's because the further that data leaves from that organization, the further it goes, the more chance there is that that data gets out. So again, what do I want to do? I want to bring that data security closer to itself. And if I'm going to be working with a fabricator or a supplier, typically there's going to be a bidding process. So I might have 100 different companies that are fabricators that work for me, to help me fabricate parts. And when I do that, I'm going to share pictures of this vehicle, I'm going to share exactly what the specs I need and everything that I need, and I'm going to go to, let's say, 5 different companies, maybe 10 different companies, and I'm going to share that data with them, and whoever comes back with the best bid is the one that I am going to work with. Great. But what happens to that data now that it's with 9 companies that I didn't choose? Well, out there, it would just be out in the wild. You know, these companies could print it, leak it, screen share it, send it to other people. That's not what I want to have happen. So in the case of EDRM, what's great is you have the ability to be able to stop somebody from printing it, stop somebody from sharing it. You'd be able to set an expiration date on that file. We've all sent out files to the wrong person. It doesn't feel good. And then we go to try to retract that data, and now they get a message that says somebody's tried to revoke this data, which just brings more attention to it, and it never got revoked anyways. It's not a good feeling. Now, in the case of these large automotive manufacturing companies, they can say, you'll have access to it. This is what you can do. You can view and edit, but you can't print or screen share it. Send it to somebody else. You can't download on a USB drive. And then if I don't pick you, I'm going to instantly expire that. I could set an expiration date 30 days out. I could just do it today. So how do I get there? And this is an important part of the data protection journey, is one, understanding what the gaps are, and two, understanding how to get to where we want to be, which is to always remain in control of that data. CASB is one way to do it. Discovery is one way to do it. DLP is one way to do it. Classification is one way to do it, especially when you think about your internal data. But again, that's not the full life cycle of your data. So these tools can be integrated together so that you can be content aware, meaning I know what is in this file. I understand that this is PII data. I understand that this is IP. Right? I know what my data is, but I can be boundary independent on how I share that data and remain in control, and it can all happen automatically based on the discovery of that data. So let's say that potentially CASB or DLP or discovery could be step one on that data protection journey, and EDRM could be step two. I would also mention, though, that some of those projects take a long time. The DLP journey and the discovery journey, in order to get true value, can take 12 to 18 months. Now, I might have one department within my organization that holds the most sensitive data. Could be research information, it could be my HR department, it could be my finance department. So one great way to also add EDRM without the need for CASB is to be able to do it as step one. Why would I do that? Because of the time to value. Seclore can get organizations, EDRM can get organizations to data protection in a very quick period of time. Traditional encryption versus data-centric security. I can control who, when, what, where. I'm going to be able to always remain in control of that data, regardless of the device or the network or the application. I can meet regulatory compliance requirements, and I can prevent data risk. There's many different use cases that we have. I wish I had more time with you. Please come by the Seclore booth if you have any questions. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about some of the use cases for data, enterprise data security and EDRM. Thank you all very much for your time. Greatly appreciate it.